Protests. Just hearing that word is enough to make so many of us think, not my scene. Many times we feel that protests are just making a big fuss, complaining about a non-issue. Sometimes we may feel the issue is important, but we may think protests are not the way to go. And even if we do think protests are the way to go, we may not attend protests merely because we don't know they're taking place, because we don't socialize in the correct circle. So maybe we need to change the way we look at practicing the act of dissent. Let me tell you one way. In Pakistan, at the height of Zia-ul-Haq's regime, there were a lot of oppressive measures taken by the state. Many people criticized these steps, and one of the critics was the poet Faiz Ahmad Faiz. He was subsequently thrown in jail. To protest this, a number of citizens organized a Support Faiz concert. It was held at a football stadium, and a number of performers came one by one and presented their art. One of these performers was the ghazal singer Iqbal Bano. At the time, the sari was banned in Pakistan, but she walked onto stage wearing a sari and performed the song Hum Dekhenge. Sab taaj uchhale jayenge. As you can hear, the crowd went wild. She was screaming, she was kicking, she was going to stop. The song itself is a song of hope, of encouragement. It says to one fellow Pakistanis, we will see the day these false rulers are overthrown, when the truth shall reign again. She tries to start singing again, but the crowd is angry. They keep cheering. The instrument is shaking. The crowd continues. The power of performance. It can bring us together. It can make us empathize with someone we saw for the first time a couple of minutes ago. It can make us disengage from our own lives and delve into seemingly private aspects of someone else's. It can make us think about things we'd never have thought of before, but in ways that are engaging and entertaining. It is these aspects of performance that make me believe that performance is incredibly suited to becoming a means of protest. You see, when we read a news article, the most unfortunate thing is we're used to reading similar news articles. A Dalit student commits suicide. It's so easy for us to let those words remain just that, words, on a newspaper or on a computer screen. But when we see a man standing in front of us, reading the final words written by someone driven to death, it's far harder to remain detached. That's what performance can do. It can change opinions, which is exactly what protests are trying to do. But one of the biggest problems with protests today is that people don't go. Think about it yourself. Each one of you is less likely to want to attend a morcha or a candle march protest, but is more likely to want to go for a dance show or watch a play. That's where performance protest comes in. It bridges this gap between art and the act of dissent. And this is not something new. We've all grown up with it. Every one of us has seen or heard of street theatre or nukkad natak in India, or the jazz movement in the United States, or even slam poetry in more recent times. But the unfortunate thing is, the style of most performance arts is very hierarchical. The performer stands far away from the audience, like I am right now. The audience is supposed to react only to certain moments of the performance, and these moments are carefully orchestrated. There'll be a crescendo in the music. An actor will wink at the audience. The audience essentially has very limited capacity to make its opinion clear in a performance. Here enters Boal. Boal was a theatre practitioner from Brazil who believed that the audience should be transformed from spectators to spectators. The audience would interact with each other and with the performers. I think interaction is very important in any type of protest because there's always a risk of a performance or a speech or anything to turn into propaganda, right? And more than that, I believe the most important aspect of protest is to incite a conversation. This conversation can lead to further debate, more protests, and then can bring about change in a way that is suited to as many parties as possible. I know what some of you might be thinking. This is a very long, drawn-out process, and sometimes we need immediate results. But I would still advocate this seemingly small-scale style of performance protest, because I believe that if we can start a conversation, we can bring about so much change. And we can bring this conversation about change to those spheres of the population that don't otherwise engage in it. And the audience, if they're interacting, can have such an immense effect on each other. For example, in the chanting in Pakistan, you can notice how in the beginning a few people are chanting. Their volume is low. But they encourage each other to chant louder and louder and louder. And you can be sure that even people who weren't in the audience at that point of time, who merely heard about what happened in the news or on the radio, were bolstered to join the movement against the dictator. So, how can we have interaction in performances? Boal suggested that you pick up an audience member, ask them to come on stage and join the performance. Now, this can be a little limiting. Many people wouldn't go for such performances to begin with because they'll think, I can't dance, or I don't have strong opinions about this cause, which is exactly the reason people don't go for protests. So maybe we can have less threatening means of interaction, such as throwing a question out to the audience and basing the rest of the performance on the basis of the responses the audience gives. This can be very risky too. For example, I heard of a show where there was silence for 45 minutes because no one spoke. So we can have safer means as well, such as a discussion at the end of a performance or during the interval. And since we're talking about breaking the hierarchy, it would be important for the performers to not stand far away from the audience, but to stand at the same level as them, to mingle with them, to walk among them. And interaction can happen in so many different ways. For example, there's a type of theatre called verbatim theatre, where the creator of the performance will interview members of a community that have faced a certain problem. The performer will then recite exactly those words that that individual said to them. This way, the audience gets to interact with an individual that has actually faced that problem. But at the same time, that individual is not forced to relive their bad experiences over and over again. Interaction can also happen for performers alone. If you take performers from different communities, bring them together to create one piece, you create something that can speak to so many different people at the same time. I recently watched a play where the actors from the Jan Natya Manch in Delhi collaborated with actors from Freedom Theatre Palestine to put up a piece that was half in Arabic, half in Hindi. The Palestinian actors were displaying stories that could very well have been their own, displaying that anguish. And on the other side, an Indian actor mirrored their movements, speaking in Hindi, so the audience could understand. And this is not to suggest that interaction is limited to only theatre. Even a so-called static piece of art can be very interactive, such as Banksy's latest creation. It shows the girl from the movie Les Miserables, crying, surrounded by tear gas. Next to her is a QR code. When you scan the code, it leads you to a website which shows you a video of how the French government is treating Syrian refugees at its camps. The important point to remember though is, art is not the end of it, it's merely the beginning. The point of art is to incite a movement or add volume to an existing one, but it has to be backed up with other forms of protest, such as a morcha or a petition or court cases or parliamentary debates, what have you. This can happen. It's not just idle fantasy. Let me end my talk with one final anecdote. In Manipur, Ratan Thiam's theatre repertory company put up a play called Chakravyu. In the play, at the end of the Cheer Haran scene from the Mahabharata, where the men are pulling Draupadi's sari off, the actress playing Draupadi stood naked on stage. Sometime later, a group of women marched naked through the streets of Imphal and stood in front of the Assam Rifles cantonment with a sign that said, Indian Army, rape us, to protest the rapes committed by the army under the protection of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. Art can bring about change, or at least inspire you to bring about change, if we only give it a chance. Thank you.